how China's invasion of Taiwan went from difficult to impossible. The Communist Party of China likes to talk about its desired capture of Taiwan as the long-awaited rejuvenation of the country, as if invading a close-by nation of democratic people will somehow bring prosperity to China's slowly crumbling economy. This mad dream of theirs always looked improbable, not just because the Chinese government can barely sort out any problems on its own land, but also because Taiwan has always had the support of the US and Japan on some level. Oh, and not to mention, there's also this little thing called the Taiwan Strait, a literal sea between China and Taiwan, preventing the Chinese from coming in and conquering it. Until now, the international support was mostly veiled. The U.S. technically adopted an approach of strategic ambiguity, which supposedly meant they refused to say whether they'd step in to prevent an invasion or not. But the widespread belief was always that Washington would come to Taipei's aid if need be. Japan, on the other hand, has never been close with the PRC, which wasn't such a problem in the past when they stuck more closely to their pacifist constitution that was forced upon them in the end of World War II. In recent years, though, that pacifism message has quickly been eroded as Japan looks more and more confident in their ability to step in should Beijing ever try and go further than is wanted. But things are changing, especially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. No longer are these historically militarized countries pretending that standing by is an option should Beijing ever try and invade one of the most economically important countries in the world. There are direct military moves that show Biden's announcement that the era of strategic ambiguity is over is about more than just words. The United States has begun preparing for the deployment of fearsome B-52 bombers in Australia. From there, they are easily within range of some parts of China and can drop devastating ordinances should Beijing cross the line that they've been warned not to. It is expected that up to 6 of these B-52 bombers will be placed in an airbase on North Australia, with facilities for their storage and maintenance already mostly set up. Australia represents a perfect point from which the U.S. can counter Beijing. Canberra is more than enthusiastic about America's anti-China stance, with the two of them leading the charge in the Five Eyes alliance that works around the clock on monitoring China's misdeeds. Whilst America can't launch these military retaliations from their own land, their stance is still being projected from home by other means. Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan earlier in 2022 showed Washington's willingness to rile Beijing up and show just how serious they are about allowing Taiwan to express itself as a democratic sovereign nation. China's mad response was a dead giveaway of just how strong a message it was, with the PLA carrying out an intense drill around the island in response that mostly came across like a tantrum from a toddler who's worried they won't get a second dessert. And if the Chinese thought this show of force would impress the international community, it did the literal opposite. Why? Because the Chinese government only was daring enough to start the military drills after Pelosi was no longer in Taiwan. I mean, heck, China, is there a better way of telling me you're absolutely terrified of the U.S. military without actually telling me you're absolutely terrified of the U.S. military? Actions speak louder than words, and if you're telling me that you're totally not afraid to fight me, but only start throwing punches at my shadow after I leave for another country, I'm pretty sure you're actually scared crapless of me. An official complaint was even lodged by China when President Biden last said that Taiwan would be defended. Unsurprisingly, Taiwan has been more than grateful for the much-needed support. The main worry is that China will go through with suicide by invasion, no matter how clear Washington makes it that they and their allies will defend Taiwan with full force if need be. During President Xi's recent CPC Congress, which is basically just a showy facade so they can pretend they have a proper political system, the three-term leader essentially laid bare the aims of his administration for the next decade or so. His constant use of the term rejuvenation which is locally known as meaning reunification of China with Taiwan and Hong Kong, shows that he sees this as the centerpiece of his leadership. Complete reunification must be realized, and it can without a doubt be achieved. This confidence is worrying because however well Taiwan is defended, there will be lots of lives lost between both sides. Because China's invasion is unlikely to let up once it gets started, for their unimpressive size, Taiwan can do an impressive amount of economic damage once they decide that Beijing has crossed a line. The manufacturing of microchips in Taiwan is unrivaled, and any country that wants modern technology, whether that be for consumers or their military, realistically needs to have trade ties with Taiwan. Once Taiwan decides to stop providing China with the microchips, which they inevitably will once the invasion begins, China will have a limited amount of time before economic, military, and technological collapse. Not to mention that the Taiwan Strait is only suitable to cross at scale at most 2 months of the year, and these 2 months are not back-to-back, which means they have at best a window of opportunity to get across the Taiwan Strait and conquer the island within 4 weeks, until the sea itself makes crossing on a large scale impossible. And even then, America has no intention of taking things easy on China. When U.S. Navy Chief Michael Gilday heard President Xi say at the Chinese Communist Party Congress about reunification, he responded that America should maximize domestic production rates of weapons that really matter in a fight. If China doesn't realize just how serious America and Japan are, soon then they're going to embarrass themselves and hurt a lot of their own soldiers. Japan even is leaving its completely pacifist reputation in the past. Japan is opening new SDF sites in Okinawa, particularly in its most southern and western islands, which are closest to Taiwan. Those deployments include establishing an electronic warfare unit in Naha this year, fielding part of the Japanese Air Force's 53rd Warning Squadron to Yanaguni Island, which is just 100 kilometers from Taiwan, and transferring from mainland Japan to Ishigaki Island, a surface-to-air guided missile unit, according to the Japanese Defense Ministry. Japan knows that the time of peace could be over in the region and is clearly willing to act accordingly. Oh, and did I even mention that India absolutely hates China? In recent years, they had actual border clashes where actual soldiers on both sides died. I'm sure India is rubbing their hands with glee, waiting for the Chinese People's Liberation Army to invade Taiwan so they can attack China from the opposite side of the country. So it won't even be a fair fight for China if the poop really hits the fan. However, all logic aside, we do need to point out one thing. Unfortunately, we know that China's political and economic system means that if one crazy person gets their hands on the lever of power, then something terrible can happen. There just aren't enough influences that can strongly push back against it. But have no doubt that when the time comes, Xi's aims will look like a disaster. China's military is not even close to being a match for Japan, India, and the West combined.